Snow fell quietly across the fields of eastern France. It was January 26th, 1945. Bitter cold, gray skies. The kind of day where even breath froze in the air. Out beyond the shattered tree line, German troops were advancing nearly 200 men, 6 tanks, and a wall of machine gun fire. In front of them stood one man, a small, wiry figure in a worn field jacket, half frozen and covered in soot. He wasn't supposed to be there. His men had already pulled back, but he stayed. He climbed onto the wreck of a burning tank destroyer, smoke curling around him, and pulled the trigger on a .50 caliber machine gun. The weapon roared to life, spitting fire into the fog. Enemy soldiers fell by the dozen. The snow turned black with smoke and red with blood. For nearly an hour, that lone American held off an entire German company, buying his men time to regroup, to survive. When it was over, 50 Germans lay dead, and the man who did it was just 20 years old. His name was Audie Murphy. He would become the most decorated soldier in American history. A farm boy who grew up in hunger, rose from nothing, and in one frozen moment, became the embodiment of courage itself. But before the medals and the headlines, there was a boy from Texas, barefoot and hungry, with fire in his heart and something to prove. Texas, 1,920 seconds. A dirt road winds through the cotton fields. The sun beats down hard, and a small boy, maybe 12 years old, walks barefoot, a rifle slung across his shoulder that's almost taller than he is. That boy was Audie Murphy. He was born into poverty so deep it could break most men before they even began. The 7th of 12 children, raised in a sharecropper's shack with a leaking roof and no electricity. When the Great Depression hit, hunger became a daily companion. They didn't measure life in years, but in seasons, harvests that failed, winters that bit deeper than the last. His father, Emmett, was a drifter, a man who chased odd jobs and bad luck, until one day, he simply didn't come back. Audie was 10. His mother, Josie, tried to hold the family together, but she was small, sickly, and tired. By 16, Audie was the man of the house. He quit school after the 5th grade and went to work picking cotton, cutting wood, doing anything that put food on the table. When there wasn't work, he hunted. Rabbits, squirrels, birds, whatever he could bring down with his old .22 rifle. He became a marksman out of necessity, not sport. Later, he'd say, "We didn't shoot for trophies, we shot for supper." Despite the hardship, there was something in Audie, a quiet determination, a kind of defiance against the world. He was small, barely 5'5", but tough as boot leather, and under that calm, polite drawl was a temper like gunpowder. When other boys teased him for being poor, he fought back fast and fierce. He didn't fight to win, he fought to prove that no one would ever push him down again. That instinct to stand his ground, no matter what, would one day make him a legend. In 1941, his mother died. The family scattered, the younger siblings sent to orphanages, the older ones off to find work. For Audie, there was nothing left in Texas but ghosts and empty fields. Then came the news: Pearl Harbor. America was at war. Across the country, young men lined up to enlist, their faces full of pride and fear. Audie saw his chance not just to fight, but to escape. He was 17, underweight, and looked like a kid. But in his mind, he was already a soldier. He tried the Marines. They laughed. The Navy turned him down too. He was too small, too light, too young. Finally, in 1942, the U.S. Army said yes. He had to lie about his age, claimed he was 18, but they took him anyway. At last, he'd found his way out. He boarded a bus with a handful of other farm boys and factory hands, leaving behind the dust of Texas for the uniform of a soldier. They sent him to Camp Walters, near Mineral Wells, Texas. The place was a furnace, August heat, red dirt, and the endless barking of drill sergeants. Audie struggled at first. He was scrawny, barely 110 pounds. The packs were heavy, the runs brutal. The other recruits teased him, called him Shorty or Babyface. But every time they said he couldn't do something, he did it twice. He shot expert marksman scores with a rifle. He could hit targets other men missed, calm and steady as a stone. When they marched, he never quit. When they ran, he ran until he fell, and then he got up again. It didn't take long before the instructors noticed. One sergeant wrote in his report, "Murphy, tough kid, small, but mean. Fights like a cornered bobcat." Before shipping out, Audie went home one last time. He visited his little sister, Nadine, the one he'd promised to take care of after their mother's death. She begged him not to go. He smiled, that same quiet smile, and said, "Someone's gotta go, Nadine. Might as well be me." Then he walked out the door and never looked back. In early 1943, Murphy and the men of the 3rd Infantry Division boarded a troop ship bound for North Africa. They were part of a massive buildup, thousands of soldiers preparing to take the war to Hitler's doorstep. For many, it was their first time on a ship, their first time away from home. For Murphy, it was his first time seeing the ocean. He stood on the deck, staring out at the endless water, thinking of Texas, of dry fields, sunburned hands, and the smell of gun oil. Now he was part of something far bigger. He didn't know it yet, but the next 2 years would turn that shy farm boy into one of the most lethal soldiers in the world. Their destination: Sicily, July 1943. When the ramp dropped and the smell of cordite and salt water hit, Murphy saw his first glimpse of war: burning trucks, craters, and the sound of gunfire rolling across the hills. He was 19. The first firefight came fast and chaotic. German machine guns pinned his platoon behind a low stone wall. Audie lay there, heart hammering, face in the dirt. He could hear men yelling, bullets cracking overhead, the sound of someone screaming. Then something inside him shifted. He rose up, aimed carefully, and squeezed the trigger. The first German dropped, then another. His hands stopped shaking. His breathing slowed. He wasn't afraid anymore, he was focused. That was the moment the boy from Texas became a soldier. Over the next months, he fought across Sicily and Italy through heat, mud, and endless artillery fire. He proved himself again and again, not just as a marksman, but as a leader. When his squad leader went down, Murphy took command without hesitation. He learned to read terrain, anticipate ambushes, and move like a ghost through the rubble. The men began to trust him and to follow him. By the time the Allies reached Anzio in early 1944, everyone knew the name Audie Murphy. He was still small, still quiet, but there was steel in his eyes now. A corporal said later, "Murphy didn't talk much, but when he did, you listened because he'd been through hell and didn't flinch." After Anzio, Audie's unit was pulled back to rest and refit. He'd seen death, seen what war did to men, and somehow, he'd come out harder, sharper. One evening, he wrote in his journal, "I don't hate the enemy. I hate the war. But I'll do my job until it's done." That was the essence of Audie Murphy, not bravado, not hatred, but duty. He didn't fight for glory or medals. He fought because someone had to. And deep down, he was still that hungry Texas boy standing his ground, refusing to be broken. Sicily, July 1943. The morning air was thick with dust and diesel fumes. Columns of landing craft crawled toward the beaches, their hulls packed with nervous young soldiers clutching M1 rifles. Inside, one of them sat Private Audie Murphy. He was 19, sunburned, exhausted, and trying not to throw up. The engines roared, the ramp dropped, and chaos exploded. Machine gun tracers stitched across the sand. Men shouted and fell. Waves churned with smoke and blood. Audie hit the beach and dove for cover behind a jagged rock. The air smelled of cordite and burning oil. He looked around. His squad leader was down, hit before even making it off the ramp. For a moment, everything froze. Then training and instinct took over. He crawled forward, dragging the wounded man out of the surf, then returned fire with calm precision. Each shot deliberate, measured. By the end of that day, his unit had taken the ridge overlooking the shore. The cost was high, too high, but Sicily belonged to the Allies. And somewhere amid the smoke and noise, a small Texan had found his rhythm in war. Over the next weeks, the men of the 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Division, marched through dusty Sicilian villages, chasing retreating German troops up the island's spine. Murphy learned quickly: keep your head low, keep your rifle clean, and never trust the silence. It always came before an ambush. He watched friends die in seconds, hit by artillery or snipers hidden in stone farmhouses. He learned to move like a shadow and shoot before the enemy could blink. One evening, after a firefight outside Palermo, his platoon sergeant clapped him on the shoulder. "Kid, you're either lucky or you're born for this." Audie didn't answer. He didn't believe in luck. After Sicily fell, the 3rd Division landed on mainland Italy. The campaign there was brutal mountains, rain, mud, and an enemy dug into every hillside. The Germans called it defensive warfare. The Americans called it hell. Audie fought through Salerno, Naples, and Anzio places, where men drowned in foxholes and tanks sank in mud. Supplies ran low, tempers flared, and every step forward cost blood. But Murphy endured. He didn't talk much. He didn't complain. When rations ran out, he hunted for food. When orders came, he followed them to the letter. He was promoted to corporal, then sergeant, not because of rank or politics, because when bullets flew, he stayed calm. One night, pinned down near Casino, he crawled through shellfire to rescue 2 wounded men. He dragged them back one at a time, blood soaking his uniform, his ears ringing from explosions. When an officer asked why he risked it, he simply said, "They'd have done the same for me." By 1944, the war had carved something new into Audie Murphy. The boyish face was still there, but the eyes had changed cold, watchful. The eyes of a man who'd seen too much. He had earned respect the hard way. Men who once teased him now followed him without question. One private said later, "He wasn't the biggest guy, but when Murphy said move, you moved." You could feel he'd been to places the rest of us were scared to go. In January 1944, during heavy fighting near the Italian town of Mignano, Murphy and his squad came under intense machine gun fire. Pinned down behind a wall, they couldn't move forward. Audie spotted the gun nest 3 Germans in a stone farmhouse pouring lead into his men. Without waiting for orders, he slipped off alone, crawling through mud and shell craters until he was behind the enemy. He tossed a grenade through the window, burst in, and finished the job with his rifle. When it was over, the machine gun fire stopped. He returned to his platoon like nothing had happened. His commander recommended him for the Bronze Star. It was the first of 33 awards that would one day hang on his uniform. But at the time, Murphy just shrugged. "I was just doing my job," he said quietly. In February, the division was sent to Anzio, where the Allies tried to hold a narrow beachhead against relentless German counterattacks. The area became known as Hell's Half Acre. Constant artillery, no cover, and the stench of death everywhere. For months, Murphy lived in a shallow foxhole, soaked to the bone, eating cold rations, sleeping with his rifle across his chest. He wrote in a letter home, "It's the waiting that kills you. The shells scream over all night. We just lie here and hope our number doesn't come up." One night, a mortar hit nearby, killing his best friend, Private Laddie Tipton. Tipton had been like a brother, the one who shared cigarettes and jokes when the world seemed to fall apart. When he died, something inside Murphy snapped. He charged the German position alone, firing until the rifle clicked empty, then throwing grenades until there were none left. By the end, the entire enemy squad was dead. He never spoke of it again. When officers asked how many he'd killed, he just looked away. From that day on, men whispered his name with a mix of respect and fear. Murphy wasn't reckless. He was relentless. By the spring of 1944, he was a staff sergeant. He had survived more battles than most men could count, and he carried the weight of each one on his shoulders. At 20, he was already a seasoned combat veteran. His superiors noticed his composure under fire and began grooming him for command. But command came with guilt. Every time he sent men forward, some didn't come back. He once wrote in his pocket diary, "Leadership is making decisions you hate. It's giving orders that get friends killed." During one assault near Rome, his platoon was pinned by snipers. Murphy crawled ahead, exposed, and spotted the muzzle flash from a church tower. He waited for the next shot, aimed, and dropped the sniper with a single round. When the men caught up, they found him sitting calmly, eating a K-ration bar. "You scared, Murph?" one of them asked. "Sure," he said, "but I shoot straighter when I'm scared." By mid-1944, the Allied advance up Italy had stalled. So the 3rd Division was reassigned to a new operation, Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. It would be another amphibious landing, another chance to push into Nazi-held territory. And for Murphy, it would mark the beginning of his transformation from hardened veteran to living legend. The men boarded transports once more. Some joked nervously, others prayed. Audie cleaned his rifle in silence. He wasn't the same kid who had first stepped onto the beaches of Sicily. He had lost too many friends, seen too many faces go still in the dirt. But there was still fire in him, the same defiance that had carried him through Texas poverty, through boot camp humiliation, through the killing fields of Italy. He looked at the horizon and said softly to no one in particular, "Let's get this over with." When he arrived in southern France that August, Murphy had already built a reputation that spread beyond his regiment. Officers spoke of his uncanny survival, his calm leadership, his near-supernatural aim. But he didn't care about stories. He cared about the men under his command and bringing them home alive. War had stripped away everything else. There was only the mission, the rifle, and the endless march forward. Soon, the boy from Texas would find himself in battles that would test not just his skill but his soul. Because in southern France, fate was waiting with one final lesson: that courage and survival come at a price no medal can ever repay. By 19, he had survived 3 invasions, earned his first medals, and buried half his friends. The world would soon know his name. But Audie Murphy never fought for fame. He fought because someone had to. August 1944. The sea was calm off the southern coast of France. Above the waves, hundreds of landing craft cut through the water like blades, carrying the soldiers of the U.S. 7th Army toward the beaches of Provence. Among them was Staff Sergeant Audie Murphy, now a battle-hardened veteran of Sicily and Italy. His face was lean, sunburned, and older than his 20 years. In his eyes, the same stillness, the calm before violence. The invasion Operation Dragoon was the Allies' plan to push north and trap German forces between the French Riviera and Normandy. For most soldiers, this was a new chapter in a long war. For Murphy, it was another field of ghosts waiting to be born. The landings went smoother than expected. The Germans were scattered and retreating inland. Murphy's unit, Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Division pushed north through small villages and rolling vineyards. At first, spirits were high. They were finally moving fast, chasing an enemy that had once seemed invincible. But by late August, the pace slowed, and the ambushes began. The Germans fought with cunning and desperation, laying traps, hiding in stone houses, using every twist of the terrain to their advantage. Murphy's instinct, the same razor-sharp awareness that had kept him alive since Sicily, made him invaluable. He could sense when something was off, the quiet before a trap, the faint smell of gun oil, the unnatural stillness of a field. His men trusted him completely. One of them said later, "Murphy wasn't lucky. He was tuned to war, like he could feel death in the air before it showed itself." On August 15th, just days after the invasion, Murphy's platoon was tasked with clearing a hill near the coastal town of Ramatuelle. A German machine gun nest pinned them down, cutting through the grass with bursts of lead. Every attempt to move forward ended in casualties. Murphy studied the hill through his binoculars. Then he did something that would become his trademark. He acted. He grabbed a rifle, told his men to cover him, and crawled up the slope alone. Under fire, he inched his way toward the enemy. Bullets snapped over his head, kicked dirt into his face. When he got close enough, he lobbed a grenade into the first position, then rushed the second with his carbine blazing. By the end, he'd killed 2 Germans and captured a dozen more. The hill was theirs. For his courage, Murphy received the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest decoration. When reporters later asked how he managed to stay calm, he replied, "You don't think about it. You just do what has to be done." After Ramatuelle, Murphy was promoted to 2nd lieutenant. He was now leading men older than himself, farmers, clerks, factory workers through the chaos of France. But leadership came with new burdens. He wasn't just fighting anymore. He was responsible for lives. He studied maps, coordinated movements, called in artillery, and checked on every man under his command. He knew each of their faces, their families, their fears. They respected him not because of his medals, but because he fought beside them, always at the front, never asking a man to do what he wouldn't do himself. Murphy didn't lead from behind, one soldier said. He led from the smoke. By September, Murphy's company was deep in the French countryside near Mortagne. The forests there were thick and dark, full of hidden danger. German forces, veterans of the Eastern Front, fought with savage skill. The sound of machine guns echoed through the trees like thunder. One afternoon, as his platoon pushed up a wooded ridge, they were ambushed. Mortar shells rained down, splintering trees and throwing men off their feet. Murphy's best friend, Private Laddie Tipton, was hit. A shell fragment tore through his chest. Murphy rushed to him, trying to stop the bleeding, but it was no use. Laddie looked at him one last time and was gone. Something broke inside Audie Murphy that day. The calm, controlled soldier vanished. In his place rose something darker, a storm of grief and rage. He grabbed his rifle, charged forward alone, and attacked the German position head-on. He killed them all 8, maybe 10, no one ever knew for sure. When his men caught up, they found him standing among the bodies, breathing hard, face streaked with blood and dirt. He said nothing. He just picked up Tipton's dog tags and put them in his pocket. From that day, Murphy was different. He fought harder, colder, not reckless, but utterly fearless, as if death had already claimed him, and he was just finishing the job. He took every mission the army gave him: patrols, assaults, ambushes. No hesitation, no complaint. His superiors noticed. Some called it bravery. Others whispered he had a death wish. But Murphy didn't seek death. He simply refused to let fear rule him. He wrote later, "You stop feeling. You stop thinking. You just move and shoot, because if you don't, someone else dies." A week after Tipton's death, Murphy's platoon came across another German strongpoint, an entrenched machine gun position supported by rifles and mortars. Pinned again, the men looked to their new lieutenant. Murphy ordered suppressing fire, then slipped off through the brush, moving around the flank. It was the same move he'd used since Sicily, but this time, faster, deadlier. He crept behind the enemy lines, threw a grenade, and stormed in, firing from the hip. When it was over, 6 Germans were dead, and the rest had surrendered. He returned to his men like it was nothing, brushing dust off his uniform. "Let's move," he said. "We've got ground to take." By October 1944, the 3rd Division was pushing toward the Vosges Mountains, the dense forested ridges near the German border. Rain fell almost every day. The mud swallowed boots. The cold seeped into bone. The Germans fought harder than ever, knowing their homeland was at stake. For Murphy, the war had become routine, the rhythm of exhaustion, fear, and adrenaline. But something inside him was changing again. He began suffering nightmares. He rarely slept, pacing at night, staring into the dark. He carried Tipton's tags in his pocket like a talisman, touching them before every battle. He didn't pray anymore. He just fought. In late October, during the fighting near the town of Bruvelier, Murphy led a daring assault on a heavily fortified position. Enemy machine guns swept the field. Pinned behind a stone wall, his platoon couldn't move. Murphy ordered them to cover him, then sprinted through the open ground, bullets snapping past his ears. He reached the machine gun nest, tossed a grenade, and silenced it. But the Germans counterattacked. Murphy held the line alone until reinforcements arrived, firing until his barrel smoked. For his actions, he received the Silver Star, his 3rd major combat decoration, in less than a year. His commanding officer wrote, "Lieutenant Murphy's conduct was exemplary. His indifference to personal safety inspired all who witnessed him." To his men, Murphy was more than brave. He was something almost unreal, a ghost moving through the battlefield, untouched by fear. He rarely smiled. He spoke softly. But when the shooting started, he became something elemental, precise, merciless, unstoppable. One private remembered, He didn't seem human in combat. He just switched on. Calm. Quiet. Deadly. By December 1944, the division had fought its way into the Colmar Pocket, a bitter winter campaign near the Rhine. Snow fell constantly. Visibility was near zero. The men were exhausted, hungry, and frozen. But Murphy kept them moving not with speeches, but with presence. If Murphy was still standing, they believed they could survive too. He'd already earned enough medals to fill a chest, but inside, he was hollow. Every victory cost him another piece of himself. When asked by a reporter later if he ever felt like a hero, he said quietly, "No. The real heroes are the ones who never came back." As 1945 dawned, Murphy's unit moved into the icy forests near the village of Holzwihr, in the Alsace region of eastern France. The Germans were desperate now, throwing everything they had left into counterattacks. For most soldiers, this was the final stretch of the war. For Audie Murphy, it was the place where his story would cross into legend, where one man would face an entire army and refuse to fall. He had survived every battle so far: Sicily, Anzio, southern France, the Vosges. But what waited in Holzwihr would be unlike anything before. The boy from Texas was about to stand alone on a field of fire and change history. The 26th of January, 1945. The forests of eastern France lay silent under a heavy blanket of snow. The wind was sharp, slicing through the trees like knives of ice. Somewhere beyond the village of Holzwihr, the men of Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, were preparing to face another German counterattack. They were exhausted, frostbitten, half-starved, their uniforms soaked through. But they held the line, because retreat meant opening the road to the Rhine. At the edge of a field, beside a small patch of woods, Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy stood scanning the horizon through binoculars. He could hear the distant rumble of engines, German armor, somewhere out there in the mist. He turned to his platoon sergeant, Walter Little, and said quietly, "They're coming." Company B was down to about 40 men, a fraction of its original strength. They'd been ordered to hold this position at all costs, supported by just 2 M10 tank destroyers dug in along the road. Murphy walked the line, checking positions, adjusting fields of fire, speaking to every man. He tried to sound confident, but he knew what was coming: a full German assault. He'd fought too long not to recognize the signs. The silence, the birds gone, the faint metallic echo of tank treads. He looked up at the gray sky. Snow was falling again, soft, steady flakes landing on his helmet and rifle. He exhaled slowly. "All right, boys," he said. "When they come, make every shot count." At 2 p.m., the world exploded. From the tree line ahead, 6 German panzer tanks and about 250 infantrymen advanced in formation. Mortar shells began pounding the American position, shaking the earth, splintering trees. Men dove for cover as shrapnel tore through the air. Murphy grabbed the field phone and called for artillery. "Target coordinates 047 by 291, he said calmly. "Enemy armor and infantry, fire for effect." Seconds later, American shells screamed overhead, bursting among the German ranks. The first few tanks stalled, smoke rising from their treads, but more kept coming. Machine guns opened up from both sides. The field turned white with snow and gray with smoke. Murphy shouted over the chaos, "Hold your fire until they're close. Let them come in." Within minutes, the German attack intensified. Their artillery zeroed in, shells falling closer and closer. The line began to buckle. One of the M10s took a direct hit and burst into flames, its crew scrambling out and running for cover. The second tank destroyer tried to reposition, but its gun jammed. Murphy realized they couldn't hold. He ordered his men to fall back to the tree line, set up a secondary line of defense, while he stayed behind to direct artillery. "Go," he yelled. "I'll cover you." They hesitated. "Lieutenant, you'll be killed out here." Murphy's answer was cold and steady. "Get to the woods, that's an order." As his men pulled back, Murphy stayed at the forward position, the radio handset pressed to his ear. German tanks were less than 200 yards away now, their engines roaring like beasts. He called in fire again, closer this time, almost on top of his own position. "Adjust fire," 100 yards short of my line, he shouted. The artillery officer on the other end protested. You'll get yourself killed, Lieutenant. Murphy snapped back. Fire it. That's an order. Shells began to land dangerously close, shaking the ground and showering him with dirt. But he kept calling corrections, directing the barrage with pinpoint precision. Then silence. His radio line went dead. The Germans were closing in. Murphy turned and saw the burning M10 tank destroyer, still smoldering beside the road. The crew was gone, but its .50 caliber Browning machine gun was still mounted on top. Smoke poured from its engine deck. Ammunition inside was cooking off. Any sane man would have stayed away. Murphy climbed onto it. He hoisted himself up onto the flaming hull, grabbed the 50 calories handles, and racked the bolt. The metal was searing hot under his gloves. He could feel the heat of the fire through his uniform. Then he started firing. The 50 calories roared to life, its deep, rhythmic thump echoing through the forest. Tracer rounds cut through the smoke like red lightning. German infantrymen scattered for cover, shocked that a single gun was still firing. Murphy's bursts tore through their ranks, mowing down entire squads trying to cross the open field. A tank swung its turret toward him and fired. The shell missed by inches, blasting a crater in the snow. He kept firing. Every time he changed belts, he could hear rounds cooking off inside the burning M10 beneath him. Flames licked at his boots. He shouted into the wind not words, just fury. He was alone, outnumbered 20-1, standing atop a burning tank, holding the entire German advance at bay. His men, watching from the tree line, couldn't believe what they were seeing. Private Colm, one of his riflemen, later said, "We thought he was dead a dozen times, but he just kept shooting, like the fire and smoke didn't even touch him." For nearly an hour, Murphy held that position. He killed more than 50 German soldiers, destroyed several machine gun teams, and even disabled a tank with well-placed fire through its vision slit. The enemy began to falter. Their officers shouted in German, waving arms, trying to rally them forward, but the advance had stalled. One man, a single lieutenant, was stopping a company. At last, a mortar shell exploded near the M10, spraying shrapnel across Murphy's leg. He staggered, blood soaking through his trousers. But he didn't stop. He climbed down only when he ran out of ammunition. The Browning's barrels smoking, the tank engulfed in full flame. He limped back toward his men, rifle in hand, face blackened with soot and smoke. As he reached the tree line, the Germans regrouped and began advancing again. Murphy raised his radio, somehow still working, and called in one last artillery strike. "Drop it on my coordinates," he ordered. "Right on top of me." The shells came in, obliterating the field he'd just left. The German advance broke. When the smoke cleared, the snow was red. Bodies lay scattered across the field. The burning M10 was a charred wreck, still hissing in the cold air. Murphy leaned against a tree, breathing hard, his leg bleeding. His men emerged from the woods, staring at the devastation. "Lieutenant," one whispered, "you stopped them." Murphy didn't answer. He just looked back at the field, at the wreckage, the fire, the silence. "They'll be back," he said softly. "Let's dig in." The German attack at Holzwihr was destroyed. The survivors withdrew, leaving dozens of dead and burned-out vehicles behind. When the army counted later, they estimated Murphy's actions had saved his entire company, about 40 men. For his bravery, he was recommended for the Medal of Honor. His official citation would later read, "By his indomitable courage, audacious leadership, and decision to hold his position despite overwhelming odds, Second Lieutenant Murphy stopped an attack of German tanks and infantry, killing or wounding about 50 enemy soldiers." But the medals, the headlines, the fame, none of it mattered to Audie Murphy. After the battle, medics tried to treat his wounds, but he waved them off. He sat alone in the snow, staring at the burned M10. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt empty. Later, when a journalist asked him how he survived, he said quietly, "I just got mad." The story of Holzwihr spread like wildfire through the army. Soldiers whispered it in tents, around campfires, on the long marches east. Some called him the Texas kid who fought off a battalion. Others said he must have had angels on his shoulders. When General Truscott heard the report, he simply nodded and said, "That boy's got more guts than sense." But Murphy's men, the ones whose lives he'd saved, never forgot. For them, it wasn't about guts or madness. It was about loyalty, the kind that makes a man stand his ground when everyone else is gone. As the months passed, the war wound down. Germany collapsed. The guns went quiet. Murphy was promoted again, decorated beyond measure. Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts. He became the most decorated American soldier of World War II. But peace brought no rest. He carried the war inside him, every sound, every face, every night. He once wrote, "There's no glory in killing, only relief that it wasn't you." Years later, when Hollywood came calling, Murphy reluctantly agreed to star as himself in To Hell and Back. The movie turned him into a legend, a symbol of courage and American grit. But friends said he never watched it. He didn't like reliving what happened. In private, he was quiet, gentle, even shy. He raised horses, wrote poetry, and kept the nightmares to himself. He had survived the war, but the war never left him. In May 1971, Audie Murphy's plane crashed in the mountains of Virginia. He was 45 years old. When they buried him at Arlington National Cemetery, more than 30,000 people came to pay their respects. His grave remains one of the most visited in the entire cemetery, second only to President Kennedy's. The simple white headstone reads, Audie L. Murphy Medal of Honor, World War II. But if you visit on a quiet day, you might still hear the wind across the snowfields of France. And somewhere, faintly, the echo of a .50 caliber gun on fire, holding the line against impossible odds. One man stood alone. The voice of history whispers, and the world will never forget. May 1945. The guns of Europe finally fell silent. The skies that had once been black with smoke were now blue again. The soldiers of the 3rd Infantry Division, men who had fought across Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany, were going home. But Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier in American history, stood quietly among them, staring at the ruins of a continent. He had survived when so many hadn't. Tipton, Little, so many others. Each name was a scar that no medal could cover. The war had ended, but for Murphy, the battle inside was just beginning. When Audie Murphy returned to the United States in June 1945, he was greeted as a national hero. Newspapers across the country called him America's greatest soldier. Time and Life magazines put his face on their covers, a boyish grin beneath the blue ribbon of the Medal of Honor. He rode in parades, shook hands with generals and senators, and smiled for cameras. But every cheer echoed in his head like artillery fire. People saw the hero. They didn't see the tremor in his hands, the sleepless nights, the moments when he flinched at the sound of fireworks. He was 21 years old and already a veteran of hell. Civilian life didn't make sense to him. The world moved too fast, too loud, too normal. He tried farming in Texas, but the silence of the fields reminded him of battlefields after the fight, still empty, waiting for ghosts to speak. Friends said he'd wake up screaming at night, thinking the enemy was in the house. Sometimes he'd sleep with a pistol under his pillow. He drank too much, smoked too much, and spent long hours alone, staring into nothing. They called it combat fatigue back then. Today, we call it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But in 1945, no one knew how to treat it. Murphy just called it the ghosts. In 1947, a friend introduced Murphy to James Cagney, the Hollywood actor famous for his gangster films. Cagney saw something in him, a quiet intensity, the kind that couldn't be faked. He invited Murphy to stay at his home in California and offered to help him break into acting. At first, Murphy was awkward in front of the camera. But when the director called action, something changed. The same steel focus that had carried him through battle appeared again, the stare, the posture, the silence before motion. He began landing small roles in westerns and war films. Audiences liked him not because he was glamorous, but because he was real. He didn't have to act brave. He had been brave. In 1949, Murphy published his autobiography, To Hell and Back. It wasn't written for fame or glory. It was a confession raw, unfiltered, and painfully honest. He described war not as adventure, but as a nightmare that never ended. He wrote about the fear, the exhaustion, the guilt of surviving when better men didn't. War is a nasty business, he wrote. It's about the death of boys and the man you become to stay alive. The book became a national bestseller, striking a chord with veterans who finally saw their own pain reflected in words. In 1955, Universal Pictures decided to adapt To Hell and Back into a film. When producers asked who should play the lead role, Murphy surprised them by saying, "I'll do it." At first, the studio resisted. They wanted a big star, maybe Tony Curtis or Marlon Brando, but Murphy insisted. He didn't want anyone else reliving those moments. They were his. The film opened in October 1955. Audiences were stunned. There, on the screen, was the real man reenacting the war that had nearly killed him. When he climbed the burning tank destroyer at Holtzwihr, it wasn't a performance, it was memory. The movie became the highest-grossing film in Universal's history for 20 years. Audie Murphy, the quiet kid from Texas, had once again captured America's heart. But when the lights went down and the crowds went home, he sat alone in the dressing room. He'd done it to honor his brothers, but it had reopened every wound. Every night after filming, his co-star said, he'd just sit there in silence. You could tell he was back there again. Through the 1,950 seconds and 60 seconds, Murphy acted in over 40 films, mostly westerns. He rode horses, wore the white hat, played the hero. But behind the scenes, he struggled. He gambled heavily, lost money in bad business deals, and carried the invisible weight of the war. He used sleeping pills to fight insomnia, and sometimes nightmares so vivid he'd wake up clutching a gun. He even once locked himself in a hotel room for a week, armed, afraid of what he might do if he stepped outside. He wasn't violent. He was scared of himself, scared of what the war had left inside him, but he never stopped helping others. Murphy testified before Congress, urging better mental health care for returning veterans. He donated money to orphanages, helped fellow soldiers find work, and visited VA hospitals across the country. "The war didn't end when we came home," he said once. "It just changed shape." At a time when talking about trauma was seen as weakness, Audie Murphy spoke up. He used his fame to bring attention to combat stress, long before the term PTSD was coined. He told reporters, "I think some men come back from war so full of death that they can't find a way to live." He was describing himself but also thousands of others who couldn't put their ghosts into words. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted understanding. In a country eager to forget the pain of war, Murphy reminded America that courage didn't end when the shooting stopped. Sometimes, the hardest battle was living after the war. By the late 1,960 seconds, Murphy's career began to fade. The westerns that had made him famous were losing popularity, replaced by new styles of cinema. He tried producing films, writing music, even running a horse ranch, but nothing filled the void. Friends said he never found peace, only brief moments of calm between storms. One of them recalled, he'd be smiling one moment, then just drift off like he was watching something far away. Maybe he was. Maybe he was back there again. On the 28th of May, 1971, Murphy boarded a small private plane in Atlanta, bound for Virginia. The weather was bad, low clouds, poor visibility, heavy rain. Somewhere near Brush Mountain, the aircraft disappeared from radar. Search crews found the wreckage 2 days later. There were no survivors. Audie Murphy was 45 years old. The news stunned the nation. Newspapers ran his photo again, the same face from the war. Eternally young, eternally brave. President Richard Nixon called him a true American hero. On the 7th of June, 1971, they laid Audie Murphy to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. He was buried with full military honors, beneath a simple white headstone marked only with his name, rank, and awards. Over 30,000 people attended: veterans, soldiers, families, children who had seen his films, old comrades who had marched with him from Sicily to Germany. As the bugler played "Taps," The sound echoed across the rows of white stones. The air was still. Somewhere, a veteran whispered, "There goes the bravest man I ever knew." Today, more than 50 years later, Audie Murphy's grave is one of the most visited in Arlington, second only to President Kennedy's. Visitors leave flowers, medals, dog tags, even letters from soldiers who served in later wars. They come to honor not just the hero, but the man who understood what heroism truly costs. Schools, highways, and military bases bear his name, but his greatest legacy isn't a monument, it's the truth he lived. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the will to face it again and again, even when it never goes away. In museums and documentaries, you'll see photos of him. The boyish grin, the piercing eyes, the rows of ribbons across his chest. But if you look closer, you see the weight, the 1,000-yard stare of a man who saw too much and carried it too far. He once said in an interview, almost to himself, "I fought because I had to. But if I could give back every medal to bring one of my men home, I would." That's Audie Murphy, the man behind the legend. Not invincible, not fearless, just human and somehow greater because of it. If history remembers anything about him, let it be this: that when the world was burning, a young man from Texas stood his ground not for glory, not for medals, but for the men beside him. And when peace came, and the world forgot the cost, he carried it for them, quietly, painfully, until the end. The war made him a hero. Surviving it made him immortal. "Freedom has a price," he once wrote. "I just paid more than most." The narrator's voice slows, fading to black. Audie Murphy. Soldier. Brother. Legend. The man who went to hell and never truly came back.